My dear listeners, this is an original sci-fi story I wrote for you. If you'd like to support me, just subscribe to the channel, it really helps the growth. The recreation deck of Veltara Station smelled of recycled air and a dozen alien cuisines competing for dominance. Callista Harlow kept her tray low and her steps quiet, navigating between clustered tables of traders, dock workers, and off-duty crew. She preferred the far corner, a nook beside the viewport where the stars held still and no one asked her questions. She was halfway through her synth grain porridge when she heard it. Not the ambient noise of the station. Something underneath it. A thin, keening sound, almost below the range of human hearing, resonating in the bones more than the ears. Callista set her spoon down. Around her, the other diners chattered on, oblivious. She tilted her head. There, again. It was coming from the corridor adjacent to the deck, the one that led to the maintenance bays. Callista hesitated for exactly 4 seconds. She counted, then picked up her tray and followed the sound. Bay 17 was supposed to be decommissioned. The atmospheric scrubbers along its eastern wall had failed 2 weeks prior and the repair crew had not yet arrived. The bay was cold, considerably colder than the rest of the station, and dark except for the emergency strip lighting that pulsed a dim amber along the floor. The cub was pressed into the far corner beneath a dormant conduit panel, knees tucked to its chest, all 4 sets of claws buried in the seam of the wall as though trying to disappear into it. Callista had seen Vrakthi before, had seen adults, that is, during her 2 years on Veltara. They were quadrupedal ambush hunters from the deep jungle moons of Kethsero, built like something between a leopard and a nightmare. The adults averaged nearly 4 meters in length, with layered keratin armor plating over their shoulders and haunches, bioluminescent threat markings that pulsed when they were agitated, and a bite force that station safety briefings described, clinically, as catastrophically lethal. The cub was perhaps 1/8 that size. Its armor plating had not yet hardened. The shoulder pieces were still translucent, soft-edged, more like thick skin than armor. Its threat markings flickered sporadically, not the controlled pulse of an adult issuing warning, but the random, uncontrolled flicker of a system overwhelmed. It was shaking. Even from the doorway, Callista could see the fine trembling in its haunches. She set the tray down on the floor. Then she sat down beside it. Not in front of the cub, not looming, but beside the tray, at an angle, with her side facing the creature rather than her face. Her mother had once told her that direct eye contact was a dominance signal in more species than humans realized. Callista had filed that away and never forgotten it. She said nothing for a long moment, just sat. The flickering markings stuttered. The cub's head, long snout, with 4 amber eyes arranged in a slight arc, turned a fraction of a degree toward her. Callista pushed the tray closer, slowly, with one hand, and then withdrew her hand to her own lap. The porridge was plain, probably not ideal for a Vrakthi carnivore. But there was a protein block on the side of the tray, dense with synthetic amino chains, and she nudged that to the front. Another long silence. Then the cub unburied 1 set of claws from the wall. Station Administrator Quellen found her there 40 minutes later. Quellen was Duresi, a species of imposing bilateral symmetry, gray-scaled, with a bureaucratic disposition so deeply ingrained that Callista had once watched him spend 6 minutes debating whether a form required 1 signature or 2. He stood in the bay doorway now and stared. Callista was seated cross-legged on the cold floor. The Vrakthi cub was beside her, not quite touching, but near enough that when it breathed, the exhalation stirred the loose hairs at her temple. 3 protein blocks were gone. The cub's markings had steadied to a very faint, barely there glow. Officer Harlow, Quellen said, with the particular tone of someone choosing words the way a person chooses footing on ice. What is the nature of this situation? She was alone and cold and hadn't eaten, Callista said. Her name, according to the intake registry I pulled, is Vok. She arrived on the Kethsero transport 4 days ago with a research delegation. The delegation's vessel was impounded for customs violations. The adults are in processing. Quellen's scales shifted, the Duresi equivalent of a frown. The youth holding facility is 6 bays away and staffed by a single automated unit that speaks 4 languages, none of which are Vrakthi. Callista kept her voice even. Vok has been in Bay 17 for at least 2 days. The cub made a sound, low, almost subsonic, and shifted infinitesimally closer to Callista. Quellen's frown deepened. You are aware of the danger. Vrakthy cubs are not declawed. Their ambush reflex is functional from birth. Station safety protocols clearly prohibit unsupervised contact with. I'm not unsupervised, Callista said. I'm right here. That is not what the protocol means. I know. She reached out very slowly and set her hand palm up on the floor between herself and Vok. Not touching, just present. But Vok needed someone to be right here, so I'm right here. Quellen was quiet for a moment. His eyes tracked the cub, the steady markings, the absence of aggression, the way the creature's amber eyes had half closed in something that, in a human, Callista might have called exhaustion finally releasing its grip. The Vrakthy delegation will be released from processing in approximately 3 cycles, Quellen said slowly. Assuming the customs arbitration resolves in their favor. Yes, I've been following it. Callista glanced up at him briefly, then back at Vok. I'll be here until then. You cannot sleep in Bay 17. I can bring warmer clothes. The porridge I can't fix. I'll need authorization to draw Vrakthy-appropriate nutrition packs from the medical supply. Quellen's scales shifted again. He was, Callista had learned, a fundamentally decent administrator who had spent 20 years allowing procedure to substitute for judgment, and who was occasionally startled by the gap between the two. I will note that supplemental provisions have been requisitioned for a juvenile Vrakthy in temporary station care. Thank you. He lingered. She has not attempted to harm you. No. Why do you believe that is? Callista considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Vok had opened her eyes again. All 4, watching Callista with that unnerving still attention that the safety briefings had labeled pre-strike focus, but which Callista had privately decided was simply the way a creature looked at the world when it had grown up needing to see everything clearly. I think, Callista said. She understood I wasn't predatory. My body language was submissive, sitting down, side on, hand offered rather than reaching. I didn't make loud sounds. I didn't demand anything. She paused. I think she was waiting for the threat to arrive. When it didn't, she started to believe it wasn't coming. That is a considerable risk to take on a theory. Yes, Callista agreed simply. Quellen looked at them both for another moment. Then he said, I will arrange for the heating unit in Bay 17 to be temporarily restored, and left. On the second cycle, Vok let Callista touch the edge of one soft, translucent shoulder plate. On the third cycle, she crawled into Callista's lap while Callista was reading, turned twice as though testing the arrangement, and settled. Callista did not move for 2 hours. Her left leg went entirely numb. She did not mention it. On the morning of the fourth cycle, a commotion in the corridor announced the arrival of the Vrakthy delegation. For adults, enormous, armor-plated, bioluminescent markings pulsing in urgent, complex patterns that the station's translation system rendered only partially. Child, where, child, we. Vok was on her feet before Callista had fully registered the sound. She crossed the bay in 3 bounds and collided with the nearest adult at speed, making sounds that were nothing like the thin, keening cry from the first night. These were loud and layered and, even without translation, entirely legible. Callista stood and stayed where she was, near the wall. The adult Vrakthy, Vok's parent, presumably, looked over the cub's head at her. For amber eyes, markings cycling through patterns the translator could not parse. Then it lowered its head, briefly and deliberately, and raised it again. Callista returned the gesture. Quellen filed the incident report 3 days later. Under summary of events he wrote, with more precision than he typically allowed himself. Human crew member Callista Harlow voluntarily provided care, nutrition, and presence to isolated juvenile Vrakthy over 4 cycles, preventing malnutrition and acute distress. Cub showed no aggression throughout. Contact concluded without incident upon reunion with family delegation. Under notes he added, after a pause, Human approached the situation as one involving a frightened child. This assessment proved accurate. The species of the child was, in the end, secondary. He filed it and sat with that sentence for a while before moving on to the next form. Somewhere in Bay 17, the heating unit ran quietly on. No one had submitted the form to have it turned off.